On a stormy night, a single father and janitor pulled a stranger from a burning car, risking his life to save hers. But instead of gratitude, the woman whispered a chilling command: "Don't call the police." By morning he learned the truth. She was the missing CEO of a billion-dollar empire, and someone wanted her dead. Now Derrick is trapped in a deadly game he never asked to play, where shadows close in, his son is threatened, and trust could cost him everything. He only wanted a job to survive. But fate handed him a secret that could destroy them both. Now, let's dive in. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof of Derrick Cole's battered pickup truck as he drove along the nearly deserted road. The windshield wipers screeched back and forth, struggling to clear the storm from his view. His eyes were heavy, the fatigue of another grueling night shift pressing down on him, but his mind stayed sharp. He had no choice, not with miles of dark highway still ahead. The night smelled of wet asphalt and pine, a scent that usually calmed him, but tonight it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the storm carried secrets. Derrick adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening with the strain. All he wanted was to get home to his son, kiss the boy goodnight, and rest his aching body before tomorrow's shift began. Then, through the blur of rain and lightning, he saw it. A sudden glow, unnatural and violent, flickered on the roadside. At first, he thought it was just lightning bouncing off wet metal. But as he drew closer, his chest tightened. No, it was fire. Flames licked the black sky, illuminating the storm like a beacon of danger. His truck slowed instinctively. On the shoulder, a sleek luxury car was engulfed in flames, smoke spiraling upward, mixing with the storm clouds. The fire hissed and snapped under the rainfall, refusing to be tamed. Derrick's heart pounded, every instinct screaming at him to keep driving, but he couldn't. Someone might still be inside. Throwing the truck into park, he flung open the door and sprinted into the storm. The heat hit him like a wall, his soaked uniform steaming in the sudden blaze. His boots splashed through muddy puddles as the fire roared louder, crackling as if warning him to stay away. Through the tinted glass of the driver's side window, he caught sight of a figure, a woman, motionless, slumped against the steering wheel. His pulse spiked. She wasn't dead yet. He could see faint movement, the shallow rise and fall of breath. The handle was hot, impossible to grip. So Derrick yanked off his jacket, wrapping it around his hand before pulling. Locked. He cursed under his breath, his mind racing. The fire was spreading fast, creeping from the hood toward the cabin. Seconds mattered. Without hesitation, he grabbed a large rock from the side of the road, raised it high, and smashed it against the window. The first blow cracked the glass. The second shattered it entirely, sending shards flying into the storm. The woman didn't stir. Reaching in, Derrick unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking hands and pulled her limp body toward him. She was lighter than he expected, but dead weight always felt heavier, every second dragging his muscles down. The heat seared his face, the flames biting closer as if determined to swallow them both. Just as he yanked her free, the car gave a violent shudder. A deep groan reverberated through the frame, and he knew he had seconds before it blew. With raw desperation, Derrick hauled her into his arms and staggered back from the inferno. He barely made it 10 yards before the explosion ripped through the night. A thunderous boom echoed across the storm, the force slamming into his back and knocking him to the ground. He shielded the woman's body as debris rained around them, flames clawing at the sky. For a moment the world went silent except for the storm and the crackle of burning metal. Derrick coughed, chest heaving, his body trembling with adrenaline. He turned to the woman in his arms, laying her gently on the wet ground. Her chest rose unevenly, her lips parted as she gasped, coughing smoke from her lungs. She was alive. Relief flooded through Derrick, but it lasted only a heartbeat, because her eyes suddenly flickered open. They weren't the dazed eyes of someone waking from death's edge. They were sharp, commanding, filled with a fire that matched the one they had just escaped. Derrick leaned closer, expecting a hoarse word of thanks, maybe even a cry for help. Instead, her hand gripped his sleeve weakly but firmly, her nails digging into the damp fabric. She turned her face toward him, her voice raspy yet steady, and then she spoke the last words he expected. "Don't call the police." The storm seemed to hush around them, the rain falling heavier, as if sealing the secret she had just whispered. Derrick froze, confusion cutting through his relief. Why wouldn't she want the police? She was nearly burned alive, rescued from death itself, yet gratitude never touched her lips. The fire behind them raged higher, consuming the last trace of the car. The road lay empty, the storm howling through the trees. Derrick stared down at the mysterious stranger, his heart still racing, the echo of her strange command chilling him more than the storm ever could. What kind of woman feared rescue more than the flames themselves? And why did he suddenly feel as though saving her might have been the most dangerous choice of his life? The rain had finally subsided by morning, but the storm inside Derrick's mind had not. He sat at the kitchen table, the sound of a cartoon playing in the living room where his son munched cereal, but Derrick's eyes were locked on the small TV in the corner. News anchors filled the screen, their voices tense, their words clipped with urgency. Whitestone Enterprises CEO Evelyn Cross has been reported missing since last night, one reporter announced, her polished tone a stark contrast to the chaos in Derrick's chest. A photo of the woman flashed on the screen. Confident eyes, sharp features, the face of power. Derrick's breath caught. There was no mistake. The stranger he had pulled from the burning car, the one who warned him not to call the police, was Evelyn Cross. He gripped his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles turned white. Why had she not come forward? Why had she let the world believe she was missing, maybe even dead, when he knew the truth? More chilling still was the memory of her words. "Don't call the police." The phrase echoed in his mind like a curse. All day, Derrick carried the weight of her secret. At the store, when strangers whispered about the missing billionaire, he kept his head down. At the bus stop, when other parents speculated with curiosity and concern, he forced a smile and said nothing. By the time his shift at the office building began that evening, his silence felt like betrayal, but his instincts told him speaking out could cost him more than his job. The halls were empty, their polished floors reflecting the faint glow of the overhead lights. The silence of night shifts usually brought Derrick a strange kind of peace, but tonight every sound seemed amplified. The hum of a vending machine, the squeak of his cart wheels, the hollow thump of a mop bucket rolling across tile. He pushed his cart into a dim corridor, the air colder there than the rest of the building. A flicker of movement caught his eye. He paused, his grip tightening on the mop handle, his ears straining against the silence. At first he thought it was just his exhaustion playing tricks on him, but then he saw her. A shadow detached itself from the darkness near the stairwell. Slowly, deliberately, a figure stepped into the light. Derrick's heart lurched. Evelyn Cross, the same woman who should have been in a hospital or at the very least in hiding, now stood in front of him. But she wasn't dressed in power or wealth. Gone was the sleek designer attire he'd seen in photos. Instead, she wore plain clothes, jeans, a dark coat, a hood tugged low as though she were trying to erase her identity. Her eyes, however, betrayed her. They were sharp, alert, carrying the same commanding fire as the night before. And they weren't filled with gratitude. They were filled with fear. Derrick opened his mouth, unsure if he wanted to ask why she was here, or if he should demand the answers he deserved. But before he could speak, she closed the distance with startling swiftness, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Don't say a word," she hissed, her voice low, urgent, and edged with desperation. Derrick froze, the echo of her tone cutting through him like ice. He wanted to pull away, to demand to know why she had tracked him down in the very place he worked. But then her next words stole the air from his lungs. "If you tell anyone you saw me," she whispered, leaning close enough that he could smell smoke still lingering faintly in her hair, "your son won't be safe." The world seemed to tilt around Derrick. For a moment, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt deafening. He stared into her eyes, searching for mercy, searching for any hint that this was an empty threat. But she meant it. Every syllable carried the weight of a warning carved in stone. His pulse thundered in his ears. Fear for himself meant nothing. But his son, his boy, was everything. The thought of danger touching him was unbearable. Derrick clenched his jaw, struggling between anger at her audacity and dread at the truth she implied. Why would one of the most powerful CEOs in the country threaten the man who had saved her life? Why was she hiding in shadows instead of reclaiming her empire? Why did she believe his child was now entangled in her peril? The corridor seemed to grow narrower, the walls pressing in. Evelyn released his arm, but Diaz didn't step back, her gaze burning into his as though daring him to defy her command. Derrick's throat tightened. He had saved her once, but now he wondered if she had just dragged him into something he could never escape. Somewhere deep in the building, a door slammed, the sound reverberating like a warning shot. Derrick flinched. his eyes darting toward the noise. But when he looked back at Evelyn, her expression hadn't changed. She stood still, her shoulders tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. The storm outside might have passed, but another storm had entered Derrick's life. And this one had a name: Evelyn Cross. Why was the powerful CEO threatening the man who saved her life? The silence after Evelyn's threat clung to Derrick long after she slipped back into the shadows of the office, and though the storm outside had passed, inside him the chaos only deepened. He stood frozen in the corridor, the mop handle clenched so tightly in his hands that his knuckles ached, his pulse hammering like he had just run miles, and her words echoed over and over like a curse that refused to loosen its grip. Your son won't be safe. That night, sleep became a battle he could not win. He lay stretched across his thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his mind racing like a machine with no brakes. From the next room came the steady, rhythmic breathing of his boy, each rise and fall of the child's chest, both a comfort and a torment, because now every sound beyond the apartment walls, the rumble of cars, the creak of floorboards overhead, the occasional bark of a stray dog, felt sharpened, invasive, like the world outside had grown teeth. He wanted to dismiss her warning as fear-induced paranoia, but the look in Evelyn's eyes haunted him. That sharp fire, edged with desperation, had not belonged to a woman exaggerating. It had belonged to someone, he who truly believed death was stalking her every step. The next evening, when Derrick returned to work, the dread pressed against his chest like an invisible weight. Whitestone Enterprises gleamed, as always, but its polished walls no longer looked like symbols of wealth. They looked like they were concealing secrets, every surface reflecting not light but danger. His mop squeaked too loudly against the marble tiles, every sound like an accusation, every shadow in the corners of his vision a reminder that he was an intruder in this kingdom of power. It was on the third floor that she appeared again, slipping from the stairwell as though she had been waiting all along. Derrick's gut twisted at the sight of her, hood drawn low, clothes too plain for someone of her stature. But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked through the hall restlessly before settling on him, and the weight in them pulled him closer, even as his instincts screamed to run. "You deserve the truth," she whispered, her voice quieter now, stripped of the edge that had once threatened him. He set his mop aside, anger and confusion mingling with fear. "What truth?" His words came rough, but they carried a tremor. Evelyn's lips trembled as though speaking cost her something, but her gaze didn't falter. "My car didn't catch fire by accident. Someone inside my company tried to kill me. Someone I trusted wants me gone." The words struck Derrick harder than he expected. For a moment he forgot how to breathe, because what stood before him wasn't a CEO in control, but a woman whose empire had turned into a trap. "You're saying someone tried to murder you?" he asked, though the truth was already in her eyes. She nodded once, firmly, and when she spoke again, her tone carried both steel and fear. "I can't go to the police. I don't know who I can trust. If I take one wrong step, they'll finish what they started. And now," her gaze burned into his, "now you've seen me. That means you're in this, whether you want to be or not." Derrick's mind snapped immediately to his son, to mornings with cereal and Cartos, ons, to the boy's small laugh filling their apartment. He had saved a stranger's life, but that single act had tied him to a world of shadows, threats, and betrayal. His conscience told him to protect Evelyn, but his instincts as a father screamed at him to protect his child above all. "Then why threaten me?" he shot back, voice breaking under the strain. "Why make me fear for my boy if you need me to stay silent?" For the first time, her shoulders sagged, her power dimming as though the weight she carried had finally pressed too hard. "Because fear keeps people quiet," she admitted, softer now, her words trembling. "I don't know who's watching. If they see you near me, they'll use your son against you. They'll use anyone against me." It chilled Derrick deeper than the night air, because now he realized her threat hadn't been cruelty. It had been survival. Beneath her polished surface was a hunted woman running from enemies she couldn't name. But before he could say another word, a sudden clang echoed down the hall. Both of them froze, their heads snapping toward the sound, hearts pounding as faint footsteps followed, then faded into silence. When Derrick turned back, Evelyn was gone, vanished into the building's shadows, like smoke dispersing into the air. The rest of the shift dragged like a nightmare he couldn't shake. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the vents felt amplified, each one gnawing at his nerves until they were raw. By the time he reached the locker room, he felt hollow, desperate to change his clothes and escape to the safety of home. But when he swung open his locker door, the world seemed to tilt. Nestled between his spare gloves and cleaning rags was a folded slip of paper, edges damp, ink smeared as if written in haste. His chest locked tight as he pulled it free, his hands trembling so hard he nearly dropped it. Slowly, he unfolded the note. H. His breath shallow, each second stretching endlessly until the words revealed themselves. Stop helping her, or your boy will pay the price. The message slammed into him like a punch to the chest. His vision blurred, his ears rang, the room itself seemed to press in as if the lockers themselves conspired to suffocate him. This wasn't Evelyn, this wasn't paranoia, this was someone else. Someone who knew about her, someone who knew about him. His son's name burned in his mind, his image flashing before him, small and vulnerable and innocent, and terror surged into fury. Who had left the note? A co-worker slipping it in during the shift? Someone higher, someone with eyes everywhere. Or worse, someone close to his own life. Derrick crumpled the paper in his fist, his jaw tightening. But even as fear gripped him, he knew the truth. The real fire hadn't been the one that consumed Evelyn's car. The real fire was spreading now, invisible, and it was reaching straight for his son. Who else knew about Evelyn? And how close were they to Derrick's life? Derrick's fingers clenched tighter around the crumpled note, the jagged words burning into his mind. Stop helping her, or your boy will pay the price. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his body trembling with a fear that turned quickly into anger. Whoever had written it wasn't bluffing. They knew about his son, about his life, about everything he thought was safe. The storm outside might have calmed, but inside Derrick, a new storm had been born. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Evelyn wasn't just a stranger he'd saved from a burning car. Her shadow had stretched into his life, threatening the one person who mattered most. And so, as he left the building that night, he knew there was only one thing he could do: find her before they did. The next evening, the halls of Whitestone Enterprises seemed quieter than usual, but Derrick felt eyes on him with every step. His mop squeaked against the marble floor as though announcing his presence to unseen watchers. When the elevator dinged softly behind him, he spun around. But no one was there. Only an empty metal box yawning open, as if inviting him inside. He refused. Instead, he turned toward the executive wing, where he knew Evelyn lingered in shadows. He found her in a dim conference room, the glow of a single desk lamp casting harsh light over her face. She looked more fragile than before, strands of dark hair falling loose from her hood, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Derrick dropped the note in front of her. She scanned it, her lips pressing into a thin line, her eyes dark with something between fear and fury. "I warned you," she whispered, barely audible. "You should have stayed away." Derrick leaned closer, his jaw tight. "Stayed away? They threatened my son. This isn't just your war anymore. You owe me the truth. All of it." For a moment, Evelyn looked as if she might argue. But then her shoulders slumped, her mask of strength cracked. And for the first time, she looked human, not untouchable. "It's about the merger," she admitted, her voice trembling. "A billion-dollar deal that could change the future of my company. But someone close, wants it for themselves. They arrange the fire, the silence, everything. They don't care who burns as long as they come out on top." Derrick's stomach sank as the pieces began to fit together. The fire hadn't been a freak accident. It was an assassination attempt dressed as chance. "And now?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Evelyn's gaze met his, sharp and unyielding. "Now they know I'm alive. And because you saved me, you're a problem too. If they can't erase me, they'll erase us both." The words had barely left her lips when the conference room door rattled. Both of them froze, their eyes locking in shared dread. Then, with a violent crack, the door swung open. Shadows spilled across the carpet, heavy, footsteps following. Men in dark clothing, faces hard and unflinching, stormed into the room, their weapons glinting under the dim light. Derrick's pulse exploded in his ears. His first thought wasn't of Had himself or even Evelyn. It was of his son, sleeping in their small apartment, blissfully unaware of the noose tightening around his father's neck. Evelyn moved closer to him, her voice barely a breath, urgent and laced with terror. "They're here for both of us now. The words slammed into Derrick like another blow, the room shrinking around him. He had already saved her once, dragging her from flames that nearly claimed her life. But this time the fire wasn't gasoline or smoke. It was men with guns. Men who wouldn't hesitate. He stood frozen, caught between instinct and fear, between his duty as a father and the impossible weight of the choice before him. Was he about to risk everything again? His life, his future, his son's only parent. For a woman whose secrets had dragged him into this nightmare? The answer pressed in on him with every step the men took closer. Would Derrick sacrifice himself again, knowing his son could be left fatherless? The men advanced with heavy, deliberate steps, the glint of their weapons slicing through the dim light of the conference room. Derrick's breath caught in his throat, his body taut like a coiled spring. Evelyn stood close enough that he could hear the quick, uneven rhythm of her breathing, her presence a reminder of the burden now forced onto his shoulders. For one fleeting second, Derrick thought of his son's innocent laugh, the way his boy's small hand fit so perfectly in his own. That memory ignited something inside him, not fear, but defiance. He could not, would not, let his story end in this cold, silent room. With a burst of instinct, Derrick grabbed Evelyn's arm and yanked her toward the side door, shoving the lamp from the table as he did. It crashed to the floor, plunging the room into darkness and startling the armed men long enough for him to push through the exit. Evelyn stumbled but didn't fall, her eyes wide with shock as they bolted down the deserted hallway. The thundering footsteps behind them told him the pursuit had already begun. The sterile halls of Whitestone became a maze of shadows and echoes. Derrick led them with the desperation of a man who had no map, no plan, only the raw need to survive. Bullets struck the walls, shards of plaster exploding into the air as they sprinted. Every sound was amplified, the pounding of their footsteps, the ragged pull of their breath, the metallic clatter of their pursuers' boots closing in. They burst through the stairwell door, the heavy metal groaning on its hinges. Derrick nearly dragged Evelyn down the steps, his hand gripping hers as though it were the last rope tying them to life. By the time they spilled out into the parking garage, sweat slicked his palms, and his lungs burned with the weight of every choice pressing on him. The garage was vast and dark, lit only by flickering fluorescent lights that left half the space drowned in shadow. Cars stood like silent sentinels, their glassy windows reflecting fear back at him. He shoved Evelyn behind a pillar, pressing a finger to his lips. The men's voices carried, sharp and commanding, the click of their guns echoing against concrete walls. Derrick's heart thundered as he scanned the garage. His gaze caught the faint glow of an emergency phone near the far exit, its red casing a beacon in the gloom. But to reach it, they would have to cross open ground. Evelyn's wide eyes followed his, understanding dawning instantly. "We'll never make it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We don't have a choice," Derrick hissed back. He waited for the footsteps to move further, then bolted from cover, dragging her alongside him. The echo of their sprint filled the cavernous garage, drawing shouts from behind. A gunshot cracked, the bullet sparking off metal just feet away. "Dares." Rick shoved Evelyn down, shielding her with his own body as another shot rang out. Pain seared his arm as a fragment grazed him, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself forward. He reached the emergency phone with blood dripping down his sleeve, his hand slamming against the receiver. With a voice sharp and commanding, he called for help, his words spilling fast. "Federal agents, assassination attempt, corporate coup." Evelyn gave her name, her title, her trembling testimony. It was enough. The sound of sirens soon cut through the night air, growing louder with every second. Tires screeched above them, doors slammed, and the garage filled with the thunder of federal boots and shouted orders. The armed men, suddenly outnumbered, dropped their weapons one by one. The air crackled with the shift of power as they were forced to their knees, their threats silenced at last. Derrick staggered back against the wall, his chest heaving, his vision spinning. Evelyn stood beside him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, the steel mask of the CEO stripped away to reveal only a woman who had fought too long in the dark. When the lead agent pulled off the last attacker's mask, Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her lips. It was her COO, the man who had sat at her right hand during every meeting, the confidant who had shared every secret, every deal, every victory. Betrayal cut deeper than the bullet wound in Derrick's arm. Evelyn's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself upright, staring down at the man who had orchestrated her ruin. Her voice, when it came, was low and raw. Why? The COO's bitter smile offered no comfort, only cold truth. Because you were too strong. And strength, Evelyn. Strength makes enemies. His words lingered as they dragged him away, his fate sealed by the very system he had tried to manipulate. Silence descended over the garage, broken only by the distant hum of police radios. Evelyn turned to Derrick then, her gaze soft but unwavering. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She paused, her next words heavier, deeper. "But more than that, I owe your son a future." Derrick blinked at her, his throat tight. He had never asked for anything beyond survival, beyond the simple chance to raise his boy in peace. Yet here she was, offering more than gratitude. She spoke of protection, federal cover for his family, safety he had never known. And beyond that, she offered him a position at Whitestone, not as a janitor, but as a man whose courage had earned him a place among decision-makers. A chance to lift his son out of the cycle of poverty that had defined their lives. Derrick's words caught in his chest. He had only wanted a job with a mop, a steady paycheck to keep food on the table. Now fate had handed him something far larger, far more dangerous. His son's laughter echoed in his mind again, reminding him of what truly mattered. Evelyn's eyes did not waver. She was giving him more than an offer. She was giving him a choice, a future laced with promise or with peril. Derrick stood there in silence, the weight of it pressing down. He knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same.